One Championship, Amazon Prime this Friday. Now we got Lasiri versus Rodtang. I feel as though striking's on display. I feel as though like that's a time in our sport. I will bet you if we had some kind of a nationwide database where we could actually prove what gyms on the most grassroots level of this sport is the gyms have more striking gyms added members this week or more grappling gyms. Like, I would be very curious about that. I feel as though striking's on display. You have Adesanya, you have Pierre. As a matter of fact, the only part of the fight that was even teased between Adesanya and Pierre was the grappling aspect. Very rare in our sport. So you've got Rodtang, who I think is the face of striking. I really do. For kickboxing of Muay Thai, I don't know if there's anybody that is more popular and more famous. I don't know that there's a name, one name, that carries such weight as Rodtang, but he's got a very hard fight. He's a sizable favorite over Lasiri. He's bigger. I'm talking about Rodtang. He's bigger. Guys, time out 1 second. Do you remember Mike Tyson versus Evander Holyfield Part 1? And you historians that do, a large part of that contest had to do with clinch work, which is not allowed. If you clinch, there's not a penalty for it. You don't lose a point. You're not going to be disqualified, but it's not allowed. So the referee will say break, and he'll step in, and he'll separate you. But it was a massive part of why Evander Holyfield was able to deal with Mike Tyson. The spots where Mike Tyson was most dangerous and had the most power, Evander would just grab him. Just grab a hold of him. And the referee would let it dance around for just a minute. Evander would make Mike feel that weight. Know that Mike's frustrated because he didn't get that big shot in. Knew he couldn't get the shot because he needed the perfect range, and Evander took it away from grabbing him and knew that there was no penalty for it. Like, it just created a real frustration within Mike Tyson, but it was also a way for Evander to deal with some of those positions that he didn't know that he was equipped with an answer or a counter for. So he avoided it altogether by grabbing him. And he did it all night long. He did it round after round after round. The only thing about this, you guys probably remember, is part 2 and the ear bite. You know what? Mike Tyson was in a position to be able to bite his ear because Evander had grabbed him. They weren't going fisticuffs and Mike reached out and bit him. He bit him because they were clinched up. They were together, and they were together because Evander kept on forcing. It was a very interesting move strategically. It was never talked about, possibly until just now. People that watched the fight understood it, but quite possibly you've never heard an analyst give you a breakdown and tell you about how frustrated and effective it was for Evander to just step in and grab Mike. And I say it because while Lasiri is an underdog, he's the sitting world champion. He's faster. I believe that. I can't prove that, and you might disagree with me. I think he's faster. I also know when you're taking on a bigger guy, he can do the damage. There is something to be said for power. If I hit him 5 times and he hits me 3, that's probably not enough. His 3 and the damage he can do because of his size. So I need to spread that to more like a 6-2 or even a 7-2 of me touching him versus me getting touched back. But there's strategies. What if he steps in and what if he grabs him? What if he just avoids those positions? What if he has a way of doing it? There's something that was laughed at many years ago. Rich Franklin was coaching The Ultimate Fighter. And somebody who won this process was going to challenge Anderson Silva for the World Championship. And Rich told him, when the referee says go, when the referee says go, you can just drop down to your knees. Instead of walking towards Anderson or walking him down, you could drop to your knees and then close the distance. He can't do anything to you once you're on the knees because of the unified rules. Now, this was a big lap, but the reason that was a lap, and the reason I remember this 20 years now, in the future, a comment made on The Ultimate Fighter, the reason I remember it is Rich was right. It would have been a tremendous problem. And they used to do this in Brazil. When Vale Tudo or MMA, no holds barred is what they used to call it. When our sport was forming in Brazil, there was something called jiu-jitsu, which we didn't know about. There was something called the guard, which we didn't know about. And a fight would start, and one guy would come to the middle, and then that person would sit down, or they would lay on their back. without ever engaging, without ever touching, not so much as a fist bump. They would cross and they would go to their back, and the crowds go, what is this guy doing? Well, he knew something called jiu-jitsu. And he knew about guard work, and this other guy came on top of him, and eventually they pieced him up from there. And I think that you would understand that concept. There is many things that Rodtang is going to have to deal with that we haven't seen yet. Nobody had ever laid out a strategy for Evander Holyfield to grab Mike Tyson. For when Mike gets inside and he does that best work, and he comes to the body, and he switches hands, and he comes up to an uppercut, and he steps outside, and you're hurt, and it's beautiful, and he rehearses this on the heavy bag, and he's done it to opponent after opponent. They never rehearse that if I'm just not in that position, Mike needs to be about 13 inches from me. If I just make sure I'm never in that position, I can take a step back. I can take a step forward. I just can't stay there. And during the fight, you're constantly trying to do what's called the Medusa. You're constantly trying to freeze your opponent. You'll do a flinch. You'll do a roll. So just makes him pause for a millisecond. Boom, boom, that's where you strike. You come back, you do another flinch. Boom, boom, you try to touch him. He's doing the same thing to you. But people, like human beings, will always do it. They'll always flinch. They'll always pause. When they get surprised with something, they'll always pause, even for a millisecond. If you were trained that when the flinch comes, I take a step back, you want to get hit. There are countless fighters out there, far more than there are not. I mean, like 98%, this is a literal statement, they cannot throw a punch because of their physiology. They can't throw a punch until they do the feint first. They can't just come out and hit you. They must feint. They're trained. They must see a reaction from you, and then and only then will they attack. So if they were dealing with somebody that just took a step back, they got to reset. Person takes a step back, they've got to reset. No matter how good they are, they don't know any different. They have to reset. They have to see the flinch, and then they have to come in. There was a video game character. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, to go back to Mike, but Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, Mike Tyson's Knockout, something like this, and it was on Nintendo, and the character's name was called Bull. Now, this was a very frustrating process. For any of you gamers, you'll certainly agree with me. Now you can do what's called save. You make it through X part of the game, you've got to do something else for your lives go. You can start over where you saved. You don't have to start the whole game over. That's a fairly new concept. So you would play this Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. You would eventually get to this character called Bull. Bull would knock you out, and you have to start at the very beginning. It's just painfully annoying. But when you finally figured out how to beat Bull, do you guys remember what the answer was? When Bull looks mad, and then he comes in and he puts you away. When Bull looks mad, as soon as he comes in, drop down, hit him in the body. That was the answer within the video game. Whatever tech guys that were putting this together, they had to somehow have some answer. That's the answer they gave. But guys, I swear to goodness, it's a real thing. Fighters will have a tell. And if you can throw that rhythm off, just like in the video game where you drop down, hit him in the body, and now he's got to reset, it's very real. Evander's way of doing it was to take a step forward. I share this with you because Rodtang and Lasiri, it's not as straightforward as you think. Based on what we saw over the weekend, would we agree, skill for skill, that Adesanya is better than Pierre? You'd have very good reason to believe that. Because they stood up and they fought standing up for 20 minutes, and Adesanya won the 20 minutes. Like, that would be a really good reason to believe that. However, Pierre had a strategy, which invoked a plan to come on later on. Once you're worn down, once urgency goes up, once you're not quite as focused on me because you already think you've got it in the bank. It was a psychological play as much as it was a physical play. I think it's very compelling if you know what to look for. And I think Lasiri versus Rodtang is not quite as obvious as some believe.